Mother of three is jailed for murder tonight in Omaha.
For a shooting that happened a decade ago in central Iowa. Take a look at Tracy Richter Roberts. Her ex-husband gave us this picture. In 2001, she told investigators that she shot a home invader.
Well, now the Sac County Sheriff's Office says new evidence proves otherwise.
Investigators believe the shooting was premeditated murder.
She's a divorced mother of three, recently engaged. Now, Tracy Richter Roberts is a murder suspect. 10 years ago, she told authorities she killed Dustin Weedy in self-defense at her home in early Iowa. Now, investigators believe she planned the killing herself.
Before the shocking events that made national headlines, Tracy Richter appeared to be just another loving, protective mother fiercely devoted to her family. Few could have predicted the depths of depravity she would eventually sink to, leaving a wake of shattered lives in her disastrous pursuits of control and revenge. Our tale begins in early Iowa, a sleepy rural town of under 1,000 residents where doors were left unlocked and violent crime seemed unfathomable. It was here that the warm and welcoming Richter household became the site of unholy terror one fateful winter night in 2001. By all outward appearances, 35-year-old Tracy Richter led an enviable life. A former radiology student, she was married to her second husband, Michael Roberts, an Australian entrepreneur. Together, they had 2 young children, son Noah and daughter Maisie. Tracy's oldest son, Bert, from her previous marriage, doted on his little half-siblings. To the residents of Early, the Robertses seemed like a picture-perfect family deeply involved in community and church life. However, a lengthy trail of chaos and instability riddled Tracy's past long before that horrific December night. Born in 1966 in Chicago, Tracy displayed signs of pathological behavior from a young age. Former spouse Dr. John Pittman, father of Bert, faced accusations of credit card theft and attempted murder by his then-wife. Allegations he vehemently denied, but that foreshadowed her future unraveling. Tracy's increasingly volatile behavior ultimately led to their divorce being finalized in 1996 after a bitter custody dispute over young Bert. Just 18 days after meeting Michael Roberts online, Tracy hastily remarried and uprooted her life by moving with Bert to rural Iowa. Though Michael hoped the change of scenery might stabilize Tracy's wild tendencies, it ultimately set the stage for her most horrific crime against an unlikely victim. In the early morning hours of December 13th, a call shattered the tranquility of Early. Tracy Richter frantically dialed 911, screaming that intruders had broken in and she'd been forced to open fire. By the time police arrived, the body of 20-year-old Dustin Weedy, a former neighbor and friend of the family, lay in a pool of blood in the Roberts' living room. Dustin had been shot a staggering 9 times with 2 different handguns. In her initial statement to investigators, a battered and bloodied Tracy spun a harrowing tale of lethal home invaders attacking her. She claimed that after strangling her unconscious with a pair of pantyhose, one of the burglars targeted her children upstairs. Regaining consciousness, Tracy managed to retrieve a weapon from the family's gun safe and kill Dustin in an act of self-defense before his accomplice fled the scene. To corroborate this terrifying account, what appeared to be hard evidence turned up in Dustin's car. A spiral notebook in his handwriting that contained cryptic details about being hired by Tracy's ex-husband, Dr. John Pittman, to either murder her and Bert or stage a murder-suicide. Aspiring writer Dustin was known to keep prolific journaling, lending credence to the seeming confession. At first, the rural community rose up to support the grieving yet heroic young mother who endured grave trauma to protect her babies. However, as the investigation pressed on, glaring inconsistencies and lies began rapidly unspooling Tracy's fabricated narrative. Had the notebook's confession truly been penned by Dustin under duress, as Tracy claimed? Or was it all a methodically orchestrated ploy by a sinister mastermind to cover her tracks while framing two former husbands? The answers and the depths of Tracy's depravity would soon be unearthed. As the investigation into Dustin Weddy's shocking murder intensified, a deeply disturbing portrait of the supposed heroic mother began taking shape. Detectives discovered that far from an act of self-preservation, Tracy Richter's version of events was a meticulously calculated web of lies, the deadly climax to years of disturbing behavior. The physical evidence made one thing indisputably clear: there was never a second intruder.
We're still looking at several different areas. Again, we still have no clue who that second party was in the house that night.
No unidentified fingerprints or DNA traces corroborated Tracy's claims of being attacked by home invaders that night. The notebook touted as Dustin's journal was looking more like an instrument she'd planted to frame others. Perhaps most damagingly, the nature of Dustin's gunshot wounds directly contradicted Tracy's self-defense narrative. He had been shot in the back of the head at close range, suggesting he posed no imminent threat when gunned down in cold blood. Nor did the scene bear any signs of a struggle or forced entry into the home. With her flimsy cover story rapidly disintegrating, newly divorced husband Michael Roberts came forward with a bombshell revelation. He had major doubts about Tracy's version of events from the very start. According to Michael, there was zero evidence beyond Tracy's statements that a second intruder had ever existed. She just spilled the beans when she talks in her sleep. Michael recounted Tracy telling him about dreaming Dustin's killing was orchestrated by her embittered ex, Dr. John Pittman. Michael says he immediately recognized it as a bald-faced lie by his increasingly unhinged wife to shift the blame. Indeed, Dustin seemed an unlikely would-be hitman in John's employ. By all accounts, the loner 20-year-old was a gentle soul who maintained a warm friendship with the Robertses, even mowing their lawn out of affection. A criminal mastermind he most certainly was not. Suspicions tightening around Tracy as the perpetrator, a $10,000 reward was issued for any information about the so-called second intruder she'd feverishly identified to police in hopes of corroborating her tall tale. Yet despite her vehement public accusations aimed at John and Michael, nobody credible came forward to support Tracy's account of that fateful night. In fact, beyond refusing to take responsibility for Dustin's slaying, Tracy appeared more preoccupied with scandalizing her ex-husband's names than anything else. She granted a series of salacious television interviews where she tearfully rehashed allegations of spousal abuse and sexual misconduct, claiming they'd hired hitmen against her as recently as weeks before. While the sordid affairs of Tracy's previous marriages remained virtually impossible to verify conclusively, one disturbing truth was emerging. This was a dangerously unstable, pathological liar who would go to virtually any lengths to destroy reputations and relationships for her own twisted gratification. After failing to prosecute Tracy due to a perceived lack of evidence, the murder case went bitterly cold for nearly a decade. That is, until a new set of prosecutors took a keener look into the bungled investigation's blind spots in 2011, and what they found was staggering. Not only had Tracy undoubtedly carried out the ruthless slaying alone, but her motive likely stemmed from mounting fears over an impending child custody battle with then-husband Michael. As their volatile marriage imploded, Michael uncovered the sordid truth about how his wife spun an elaborate lie to wrestle full custody of her children from her ex-husband, Dr. John Pittman. Now preparing to follow in John's footsteps by pursuing divorce and sole custody himself, Perhaps Tracy grew convinced that yet another embattled ex might seek vengeance against her by any means necessary. What better way to preemptively attack than to fabricate a harrowing assassination attempt, simultaneously painting herself as a heroic survivor while implicating those she felt threatened by? Other crucial evidence revealed Tracy's disturbing fascination with covering up heinous crimes stretched well beyond Dustin's murder. Correspondences with a convicted child molester proved she'd openly strategized about disposing of bodies, with her own children eerily identified as potential future victims. There was also her continuing harassment of Michael, including mailing him grisly crime scene photos years later, which demonstrated obsessive hatred blurring lines of rationality. Armed with this preponderance of damning proof that demolished Tracy's implausible self-defense claims, authorities felt they had more than enough to secure a conviction on charges of first-degree murder.
Yesterday, Iowa law enforcement arrested 45-year-old Tracy Ann Richter Roberts for the 2001 death of 20-year-old Dustin Weedy in early Iowa. Richter Roberts is charged with murder in the first degree of Class A felonies, and she is currently being held in the Douglas County Jail in Omaha, Nebraska.
As prosecutors prepared to take Richter to trial, yet another jaw-dropping twist would emerge that foreshadowed legal fireworks to come. Just when it seemed the sheer depravity of Tracy Richter's crimes couldn't be more shocking, prosecutors uncovered a bizarre plot that revealed the murderous mother's capacity for duplicity truly knew no bounds.
It was obvious that she made every attempt to think things out, and was very calculating in how she handled all her affairs.
In the final lead-up to her trial in late 2011, investigators made a bewildering discovery. Unbeknownst to anyone, the cunning criminal had been secretly planning to change her entire identity through fraudulent means. Among Tracy's belongings was an application filed to legally alter her name to Heidi Joanna Frospaka, a largely unspoken language from an indigenous tribe in Australia. The adopted moniker seemed like a random string of made-up gibberish at first glance. That is, until the striking connection became clear. Heidi Frospaka was the actual name of Michael Roberts' new wife, the very same man whose life Tracy had tormented for years through stalking, harassment, and malicious lies. Whether this was a premeditated plot to further terrorize her ex-husband and escape justice remains unclear. But one thing was certain. Prosecutors now had a captive audience fully transfixed by the sheer audacity of Richter's manipulative schemes. The stage was set for a trial-turned-must-see media spectacle. On October 24, 2011, the state of Iowa versus Tracy Richter finally got underway in a cramped county courtroom, with reporters clamoring for limited seats. Presiding Judge Marianne Holkman allowed a large cadre of local and national media to broadcast the proceedings for the highly anticipated case. From their opening statements, prosecutors pulled no punches in characterizing Richter as a calculated murderer who executed an innocent young man to cover her own treachery. The evidence will show the defendant did not like Dr. Pittman, asserted lead attorney Steve Saar. She had a strong dislike for Dr. Pittman, so the defendant came up with a plan to make it look like he was involved in hiring Dustin Weedy to hurt her.
The evidence in this case will show that the defendant did not want to lose physical custody to Dr. Pittman of her. Will show that the defendant did not like Dr. Pittman. She had a strong dislike for Dr. Pittman. So the defendant came up with a plan to make it look like Dr. Pittman was involved in hiring Dustin Weedy to hurt her. Dustin Weedy was at her house on December 13th. There was a pink spiral notebook that he's writing in. The pink spiral notebook will contain information. It appears to make it look like a journal, although there's no dates. And in the information in that pink spiral notebook, it will show that Dustin claims that Dr. Pittman had hired Dustin to either kill the defendant and their son Bert, or to make it look like it was a murder-suicide, that the defendant killed Bert and then herself. Dr. Pittman will tell you he didn't even know Dustin Weedy.
Saar then painstakingly walked the jury through the state's version of events. That not only did Tracy lure Dustin to her home with premeditated intentions to kill, she may have even coerced him into writing incriminating passages in the journal at gunpoint to frame her exes before executing him. For weeks, a probing dissection of all the circumstantial evidence played out in court. Forensic experts, handwriting analysis, and cell data pinged back and forth, all while Tracy looked on attentively. She showed little remorse or reaction to the now indisputable fact that she had ended an innocent life. That changed when the trial culminated in an emotional volley of testimonies from Dustin's grieving relatives. The outpouring of deep sorrow from those whose lives she'd shattered was apparently too much for even Richter's dead eyes to bear. At one gripping point, she buried her face in her hands after being described through tears as a woman without a soul. "You took my son's life because you are a lying, manipulative monster," Dustin's mother cried out before being hauled out of the courtroom by bailiffs. "You are going to burn in hell for this." After 3 weeks of witnessing a mountain of scientific data proving her guilt, the jury took less than 2 hours to formally convict Tracy Richter of first-degree murder on November 4th, 2011. She faced an automatic sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The tragedy of this case is compounded by the inescapable fact that Tracy Richter's selfish act of violence shattered not just one family, but by proxy several more close-knit families in this community, ruled Judge Holkman, her voice subdued yet stern as Richter took in her fate. It is this court's sincere hope that this long-overdue conviction can begin to heal those wounds. In a controversial decision, Holkman allowed a brief statement from the convicted murderer before officially remanding her to custody. Eyes still downcast, Richter mechanically maintained her lies until the very end. "I've gone through every what-if in my head and every scenario of how things could have ended up differently. I really do believe you deserve justice," she said directly to the Weddy family. "But I didn't murder your son." Now, over a decade into her life sentence, Tracy Richter continues her legal battle to appeal the conviction with fewer and fewer rational claims of innocence remaining. Her astounding delusion and lack of remorse seem only more evident as time passes. Despite the occasional flare-up of die-hard supporters who bought into her intricate manipulation, Richter and her twisted legacy have been confined to prison infamy and disgraced footnote status in Early's history. So, what do you think? Should Tracy Richter's desperate, ongoing appeals hold any merit? Or does her lethally self-serving killing spree mean she will forever remain behind bars until taking her last wheezing breaths? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for all our latest riveting coverage of shocking true crime cases like this. Until next time, stay vigilant.